want to welcome everyone gently, the way I always do. So before I begin, thank you for being here with me. And if you like hearing stories from a life that still surprises me at 60, you can softly tap the like button and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And now, let me take you back to the day everything inside me felt like it was shaking. The day I learned that no matter how clean I tried to make my past look, life always has a way of pulling back the curtain when you least expect it. That morning, I woke up feeling hopeful because he had asked me to spend the afternoon with him. And even though we had only known each other a short time, there was something so warm in his voice that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. But I also carried a fear deep in my chest. The same fear I carried since I grew up in a world where cracked walls, loud neighbors, overdue bills, and survival shaped every part of me. And even now, when I've built a life far away from that struggle, the smell of old wooden floors or the sound of coins hitting a counter can still pull me back. Still, that morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple beige dress because it made me feel safe, not fancy enough to look like I was pretending, but not simple enough to show the girl I used to be. And I even practiced my smile in the mirror, the one I use when I want to look calm even when my heart is storming inside. He told me he would pick me up near the bus stop, not in front of my building, and I agreed quickly because I didn't want him to see where I lived, not the peeling paint, not the broken mailbox, not the fact that I still lived in the same old neighborhood, because I was helping my sister pay off some old debts. I stood by the bus stop, pretending I had just come from somewhere nicer, holding my purse tightly, watching every car pass in case someone from the neighborhood recognized me and asked questions. And when he pulled up, smiling the way he always did, bright and open, my stomach fluttered because he looked at me like I was someone worth choosing. We drove with the windows down, and he kept asking about my childhood, curious in a gentle way. But I kept giving short, soft answers, hoping he wouldn't notice the way my voice trembled when he asked where I learned to work so hard. And when he laughed and said, "I bet you grew up somewhere peaceful," I just nodded, hiding the truth that peace was the one thing I didn't have growing up. Everything was going fine until he said he needed to stop somewhere quickly. "Just a little errand," he said, and I didn't think anything of it until we turned left. Then right, then down a street I knew too well, a street that carried too many memories. And before I could say a word, we rolled right into the heart of the neighborhood. I fought so hard to escape, and I felt my whole body stiffen, because he didn't know this place wasn't just familiar to me. It was me. And even worse, someone who knew me was about to walk right into the moment I had tried so hard to avoid. The moment his car slowed near the corner store, my breath got tight in my chest, because that place wasn't just part of my past. It was practically stamped on my childhood, the same store where I used to buy day-old bread with loose coins, and where the owner knew me by name because my mama always owed him something. And as we parked, I felt my whole body tense, like I was walking back into a memory. I never asked to revisit. He was talking casually, saying he only needed to drop off paperwork for a client, something simple. But all I could hear was the buzz in my ears warning that I had seconds before the truth I'd tried to hide stood in front of me with a face and a loud voice. And sure enough, as soon as he opened his door, someone shouted from across the lot, "Janet, girl, that you?" And I froze harder than ice because the voice belonged to Tasha, a girl I grew up with, wild, blunt, and never quiet. And before I could even duck my head, she was already walking toward us with her hands on her hips, eyeing his shiny car like it didn't belong anywhere near this block. I tried to smile, a small, controlled one, hoping she'd take the hint and keep her mouth soft. But Tasha was never soft, not even when we were kids. And she leaned in, looking me up and down like she was trying to figure out how I went from the girl who used to borrow school shoes to the woman stepping out of a man's clean, polished car. He came around the vehicle, smiling politely, reaching out his hand to greet her. And that's when she said it, loud enough for people inside the store to hear. "Ain't no way you Janet's man. You know she from right here, right? This the same girl who used to run tabs at the shop and pick bottles for change." And I swear my heart dropped so deep into my stomach, I thought it would never rise again. Because the way he turned to look at me wasn't mean, wasn't angry, but confused and surprised, like he didn't know how the pieces fit together. And that look alone hurt more than anything she'd said. I tried to laugh it off, telling her she was exaggerating. But Tasha wasn't done. She kept talking about my mama's old apartment, the one with the broken heater, and the time we had to boil water just to take a warm bath. And each word felt like she was pulling clothes off my soul in front of him, exposing everything I had tried to hold behind a smile. And there I was, standing on the sidewalk, feeling like the poor little girl I used to be, watching the life I tried to build shake under the weight of old memories. He finally stepped closer to me and asked softly, "Is all this true?" And that question stung, not because he asked, but because I had hoped deep down that he wouldn't ever have to see this part of me. Yet now it was standing between us, like a wall built from every struggle I had survived. And before I could answer, something else happened that made everything even worse, something that pushed the moment past embarrassment and straight into a truth I wasn't ready for. Before I could open my mouth to answer him, the door of the corner store swung open, and out came someone I prayed I wouldn't see, my older brother Marcus, the same man who carried our childhood scars heavier than I ever did, the same man who still lived in the neighborhood because life had knocked him down too many times. He walked out with a bag of chips in one hand and a scratch-off ticket in the other, looking tired, worn, and years older than he should have been. And the moment his eyes landed on me standing beside that clean, expensive-looking car, his whole face tightened, like he knew I didn't want him there. Not in that moment. He lifted his chin at me and said, "Janet, what you doing back here?" But it wasn't just a question, it was a reminder, a tug on the part of my soul that never fully escaped this place. My stomach twisted because he wasn't dressed neat. His shirt was wrinkled, and his shoes looked worn down, and I knew exactly how that would look to the man standing beside me. The man who came from a world where people wore their life like a clean suit. My brother glanced at him, then at the car, then back at me again. and he laughed a short, dry laugh, the kind that held too many stories he never told. And he said, "I see you moving fancy now. Guess you too good to come see your own family unless life drags you back." And the hurt in his voice sliced through me, because it wasn't true, not the way he meant it. I tried to step closer to him, whispering his name like a soft apology, but he stepped back, his pride standing in front of him like a shield. And that's when the man beside me asked, gently but clearly, "Is this your brother?" And I felt my knees weaken, because the truth was everywhere now, my neighborhood, my childhood friend, and my own blood standing on the sidewalk, all staring at me like a mirror I couldn't hide from. I nodded slowly, wishing I could control even one part of the moment, but everything kept unfolding faster than my heart could handle. And Marcus, being who he was, didn't hold back. He looked my companion right in the eyes and said, "You know she ain't from your kind of world, right? She from struggle. Real struggle." And his voice shook with a mix of bitterness and pain, the kind that comes from years of feeling left behind. The man beside me looked torn, not judgmental, not cold, just confused, like he was seeing a version of me he never imagined. And in that silence, I felt exposed in a way that made my chest ache. I reached for Marcus's arm, hoping to ease the tension, but he pulled away and muttered, "You leaving us behind was one thing, but pretending you didn't come from here, that's something else." And those words hit me like a stone to the heart, because I never tried to leave them behind. I only tried to survive. I wanted to explain, to defend myself, to tell him that I wasn't pretending. I was just scared. But before I could speak, something happened, something that made the moment snap open even wider. Something that pushed the day into a direction I wasn't ready for. And suddenly, the truth wasn't just exposed. It was about to be challenged. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, a sound cut through the tension. A loud argument coming from down the block. The kind of shouting every child from this neighborhood learns to recognize before they learn their ABCs. And I turned just in time to see two men pushing each other near the alley, voices rising, hands flying, and people stepping back the way they always did when trouble brewed. And in that instant, I felt a sharp pain I hadn't felt in years, the kind that comes from being reminded of the world you tried to crawl out of, but still lives in your bones. My companion's eyes widened as he watched the chaos unfolding, and I could practically feel the questions stacking up in his mind. Questions about safety, about my past, about the life I never told him in full, while Marcus just shook his head and said under his breath, "Same old story every day around here," like life never changed for him. And for a moment, I felt split in two, the woman I became and the girl I used to be, standing on the same sidewalk, in the same air, at the same time. Then it got worse, because one of the men broke away from the fight, running toward our direction, not paying attention, holding something in his hand, and instinct kicked in before anything else. I grabbed my companion's arm and pulled him behind me out of reflex. The reflex you only learn when you grow up in a place where danger doesn't warn you politely. The running man brushed past us, nearly knocking my brother off balance, and it was only when he disappeared around the corner that my companion spoke, his voice quiet but shaken. "Janet, you reacted like you've seen this before." And those words cracked something inside me because it was the truth I never wanted to say out loud. Marcus muttered, "She grew up surviving this stuff." And Tasha added, "Yeah, she wasn't no stranger to ducking trouble." And suddenly, all three of them, my past friend, my brother, and the man I liked, were staring at me as if I was the only one who could explain the life I had spent years trying to bury under steady work, plain dresses, and polite smiles. I swallowed hard, wishing I could disappear for just a moment, because I could feel his heart breaking a little, not out of disgust, but out of realizing he didn't know half the mountains I had climbed just to stand next to him. The air grew still, heavier than the heat around us, and I whispered, "Can we please go?" hoping to escape before something else spilled open. But before he could answer, Marcus stepped forward with a hurt expression softening his face, and he asked something that made both the moment and my breath freeze. "Janet, are you ashamed of us?" And hearing that out loud made everything around me tremble, because the truth wasn't simple, and I didn't know how to answer without breaking someone's heart, including my own. When Marcus asked me if I was ashamed of them, the words struck me so deep that for a moment I forgot how to breathe, because that question wasn't just about today. It carried every memory we ever lived through. Every night we slept hungry. Every morning we walked to school with shoes that didn't fit. Every time Mama cried quietly thinking we didn't hear her. And I could see all of that reflected in his eyes. I wanted to tell him I wasn't ashamed. But the truth knotted itself in my chest, because part of me was ashamed, not of them, but of how this place still had its hands wrapped around me, even after I fought so hard to leave. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Marcus, it's not like that." But he looked away, jaw tight, as if he didn't believe a single word I could ever say. And my companion stood beside me, silent but alert, watching this painful unraveling he never signed up for. The air around us felt thick with old wounds, and Tasha folded her arms, shaking her head like she had waited years for this moment to finally come out, saying, "Girl, be real. You ain't walked these streets in years. You only show up by accident." And every part of me felt exposed, not just my past, but the guilt I carried for so long. The guilt of surviving a place that swallowed so many people whole. I turned to my companion, wishing I could read his mind, wishing I could tell if he wanted to run, or if he was trying to understand me, because the look in his eyes wasn't anger, it was something softer, something like sadness mixed with confusion, and that almost broke me more than any insult could. I whispered again to Marcus, "I never left you behind." And he finally met my eyes, and in his voice I heard years of hurt layered over love. "Then why you hiding us?" And before I could speak, a group of teenagers ran by, loud and excited, brushing against his shoulder and laughing as they disappeared down the street. And the moment felt even more raw, because everything around us kept reminding him, reminding all of us, exactly where we came from. I took a slow breath and said, "Because I'm scared." And the words trembled out of my mouth in a way I couldn't control. And for the first time that day, my companion stepped closer to me, almost protective, as if the truth was pulling him in Instead of pushing him away, Marcus's face softened ever so slightly, just enough for me to see the brother underneath all the pain, and he asked, "Scared of what?" But fear had wrapped itself around my tongue, and saying it out loud felt too heavy, too vulnerable, especially with the man I liked standing right there. So instead, I looked at my brother, then at the neighborhood I once knew like the back of my hand, and then at the man beside me who didn't know half of who I was, and I whispered, "I'm scared you won't understand." But the moment the words left me, I knew the day wasn't done, because there was still another truth coming. One I had spent years hiding not just from others, but from myself. When I said I was scared, he wouldn't understand. A stillness settled over all of us, the kind that presses on your shoulders like a weight. And for a moment, no one moved, not even the people passing by, because it felt like the words had cracked something open that none of us knew how to close. Marcus blinked slowly, his anger fading into something more fragile, and Tasha's crossed arms loosened a little, like even she didn't expect me to admit something so raw. And my companion stepped closer until I could feel the warmth of him at my side, not touching me, but near enough that I knew he wasn't running away, at least not yet. The truth in me started rising faster than I could control, years of holding it back now unraveling all at once. And I whispered, "I've spent my whole life trying to outrun being poor, trying to hide it so nobody looks at me like I'm less." And my voice trembled so much I had to steady myself, because saying it in front of Marcus felt like slicing my heart open with my own hands, and saying it in front of the man I liked felt like holding out that heart with no guarantee he'd be gentle. Marcus swallowed hard, his lips tightening as if my confession hurt him in a way he didn't want to show. And I rushed to add, "I'm not ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of how this place made me feel about myself." And the moment I said it, the truth settled between us like a quiet, aching shadow. I could see in Marcus's eyes that he understood more than he wanted to. But pride kept his face stiff, while my companion watched me with such careful attention, like he was trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't know he was holding. Then he finally spoke, his voice low and gentle. "Janet, why didn't you just tell me?" And that question shook me, because I didn't know how to explain that sometimes the past feels safer when it's invisible, and the fear of being judged lives deeper than old memories. I looked down at my hands, remembering the girl who used to scrub dishes until her fingers wrinkled, the girl who would lie awake wondering if life had anything better to offer, the girl who grew up thinking love was something meant for people who didn't carry heavy histories. When I finally raised my head, I whispered, "Because when someone like you looks at someone like me, it feels too easy to lose everything." And the moment the words left me, I felt exposed in the purest way, because that fear wasn't just about him. It was about every person who ever looked at me like my background made me less. He stepped even closer then, his brows furrowed with something like empathy, not pity, and I could feel my heart beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. But before he could respond, Marcus suddenly spoke, voice quieter and rougher. "Janet, you don't owe anyone a clean story." And hearing him say that forced tears into my eyes, because we grew up being told the opposite, that our story was something to hide. My companion looked between us, conflicted but softer than before. And as he opened his mouth to say something, a loud voice from behind us called my name, sharp, familiar, and carrying a tone that made my stomach drop, because I knew exactly who it belonged to, and their arrival was about to make everything even more complicated. The moment I heard my name shouted from behind, sharp and familiar like a door slamming on an old memory, my whole body tightened, because that voice belonged to someone I hoped wouldn't walk into this moment. My mother. She came hurrying toward us from the corner, wearing her faded house dress and carrying a grocery bag that looked far too heavy for her thin arms. And the sight of her hit me like a wave I wasn't ready for, because she represented the rawest truth of where I came from. The truth I had been trying to hide, not out of shame of her, but out of fear of how people from his world would see her. And yet here she was walking straight toward me with a mixture of surprise and relief on her face. "Janet, baby, what you doing back here? You didn't tell me you were coming," she said with that warm, worn-out smile she always used to hide her worry. And I felt myself stepping forward instinctively, wanting to hug her, wanting to make sure she didn't think I was ignoring her, but also painfully aware of the man standing behind me, watching everything unfold. My mother looked at him next, her eyes widening just a little, not in judgment, but in confusion, because she wasn't used to seeing me with someone who carried himself like he never had to worry about bills or neighborhoods or safety. And before I could introduce them, Marcus muttered, "She didn't tell him either." And Mama's brows knit together, as if she immediately understood more than I wished she did. She shifted the groceries in her arms, trying to hide the frayed handles of the plastic bags, and asked softly, "Is this your friend?" And her voice carried a softness I hadn't heard in years, a softness that made my heart squeeze tight, because she was trying to be polite, even though she knew she didn't fit into anything about this situation. My companion stepped forward gently, offering his hand with a warm smile, and Mama hesitated before shaking it, her fingers trembling slightly. And I could see in his face that he noticed the roughness on her hands, the kind that comes from decades of scrubbing floors, washing clothes by hand, and carrying more responsibility than one woman should. She looked at me, searching my face like she was trying to understand why I never told her about him, why I kept this part of my life separate. And her eyes softened in that way only mother's eyes can, full of love and worry tangled together. And she whispered, "You look nice today," which nearly broke me, because I suddenly felt like that little girl again, standing in front of her in hand-me-down clothes, hoping to look nice enough for a world that didn't care. The silence around us grew heavy as all the pieces, my mother, my brother, Tasha, the neighborhood, and the man beside me, stood together like a living map of my life. And he looked at me with a deeper understanding than before, like he finally saw not just where I came from, but what I carried. Mama reached out and touched my arm gently, a small gesture that felt like both comfort and apology. And then she asked a question so soft, yet so piercing that it made my chest ache. "Baby, were you trying to keep us away, or were you afraid we'd scare him off?" And the moment she said it, every emotion I had been trying to hold back rushed to the surface, because the truth was tangled somewhere between those two fears. And answering her meant admitting something I never wanted to say out loud, not here, not now, and not in front of him. When Mama asked whether I was trying to keep them away or afraid they'd scare him off, her voice was so soft it almost felt like a whisper brushing against an open wound. And for a second, I couldn't answer, because every truth I'd ever buried rose up in my throat at once, choking me with shame and fear and memories I spent years trying to press into silence. I looked at her tired eyes, the same eyes that watched me grow up through struggles she tried so hard to protect me from, and I felt my chest tighten, because I could see she wasn't accusing me. She was hurting, wondering if she had somehow become the thing I was running from. Marcus stood there stiff, pretending he didn't care, but his jaw was clenched tight. And even Tasha, loud as she always was, had gone quiet, arms hanging loosely by her sides, as if even she felt the sting of the question. My companion looked at me then, waiting, not pushing, just standing with this patient softness that only made the pressure heavier, because I knew he deserved honesty. But honesty was the thing I feared most in this moment. I opened my mouth, but the words slipped out uneven, like pieces of a confession I'd never practiced. Mama, I wasn't trying to keep you away, and I felt my voice shake in a way that made me feel younger than 60, younger than 20, like the scared little girl I once was. I was trying to keep myself together, and the moment I said it, the tension around us shifted, just slightly, like the air itself leaned in closer to hear the rest. Mama blinked, confused but gentle, and I breathed in slowly, forcing myself to continue, even though the truth hurt coming out. I was scared he'd look at me different once. He knew everything. Not because of you, not because of Marcus, but because I never wanted to see that look again. And my voice cracked, because I remembered every person who had ever looked at me like poverty was something contagious, like my past made me something to pity or avoid. I could feel my companion's eyes on me, steady and warm, and that almost made it worse, because the kinder he was, the more afraid I felt of losing him. Mama stepped closer, her hand trembling a little as she touched my cheek, and she whispered, "Baby, you never needed to protect us from your happiness." And hearing that made my knees feel weak, because I realized how long I had been carrying the fear of mixing my past with my present, like they were two halves of a life that couldn't touch. Marcus let out a slow breath, something softer loosening in his shoulders, but hurt still lingered in his eyes. A quiet question about why I never trusted them enough to share my new world. And I wanted to apologize, to explain, to fix decades of distance in one breath. But emotions were piling too fast, too heavy. My companion finally stepped closer to Mama, speaking with a gentle respect that surprised even me. "Ma'am, I'm not scared of where she comes from." And hearing him call her ma'am made something warm flicker in her eyes. But before any of us could breathe into that moment, Tasha suddenly spoke, her voice cutting through the fragile quiet. "Then why you standing here looking like you about to bolt?" And the words hit him and me with a force that made everything freeze again, because the truth was, I didn't know what he felt yet, and he didn't know how deeply this moment had cracked open the parts of me I never planned to show. And now everyone waited for him to answer a question that held more weight than any of us were ready for. When Tasha's voice cut through the quiet, asking why he looked like he was about to bolt, my heart lurched because it was exactly how I felt inside. Like I wanted to run, hide, and erase every part of the day that had already gone too far. And now he had to answer for feelings he didn't fully understand either. He took a slow breath, his hand brushing lightly against mine, not possessive, but grounding. And he looked at all of us, eyes steady, but full of something I couldn't quite name. And I realized he was trying to navigate a world he'd never known, trying to hold my fragile history in his hands without breaking it. And that awareness made tears prick the corners of my eyes, because no one had ever tried that before. Mama's fingers tightened around mine, as if to remind me I wasn't alone. And Marcus finally spoke, voice lower now, almost cautious. "So, he's not scared of you then?" And I felt my throat tighten, because I didn't know if the truth would protect or unravel everything. He answered softly, "No, I'm not scared of her. Not of who she is, not of where she comes from." And the weight of those words pressed down on me in a way that made me want to collapse into relief and disbelief all at once, because I had spent years building walls around my past. Walls to keep people out, walls to keep myself safe. And here was someone telling me they didn't need those walls to love me, or at least to see me. Tasha snorted, shaking her head like she didn't fully trust him, and muttered, "Better keep up with that, fancy man, or this whole neighborhood will school you." And a small, nervous laugh escaped me despite the tension, because her honesty, raw and sharp, reminded me why this was home, why these people shaped me, and why I'd spent so long running from the truth. My companion smiled faintly, looking amused and slightly overwhelmed, and I could see him taking in the cracked pavement, the faded houses, the chipped paint, and yet still standing firm beside me, trying to understand rather than judge. Mama's voice was gentle again, tinged with both pride and worry. "Janet, you can't hide your life from love. He's here now, trying to know you, all of you." And the words made my chest ache, because I realized she was right. I had hidden pieces of myself for so long, believing my past would scare away anything good, anything new, anything bright. And now the truth was out, exposed in front of the man I liked, my family, and even Tasha. Yet somehow it didn't feel like the end. It felt like a test of courage, a moment that demanded honesty, and it terrified me. Marcus finally nodded slightly, his face softening, and Tasha muttered under her breath, "Don't mess it up," which made me chuckle quietly. And for the first time that day, I felt a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the worlds I'd lived in separately could exist together, even if it meant standing in this uncomfortable, honest, raw light for the first time in my life. But just as I was about to speak, to try and bridge the tension with something, anything, a familiar sound of laughter echoed from down the street, sharp, loud, and unmistakable. And I froze, because I knew immediately whose laughter it was. And that sound promised that the next challenge of the day was about to arrive, testing me, my family, and him in ways none of us were ready for. The laughter carried down the street like a bell I couldn't ignore, sharp and teasing. And the moment I recognized it, my chest sank, because I knew exactly who it belonged to: my cousin, Monique, loud, proud, and never one to hold back. And she had a way of making every situation 10 times more chaotic than it needed to be. She came jogging down the cracked sidewalk, hands on her hips, eyes wide with mischief. And before anyone could greet her, she called out, "Janet, I knew you'd be here, looking all fancy like you're too good for us now." And I felt my stomach twist with a mix of embarrassment and dread, because Monique didn't sugarcoat anything, and she wasn't shy about exposing the tiniest cracks in anyone's armor. Mama sighed softly, shaking her head, and muttered something about how I never escaped the family spotlight, while Marcus just rolled his eyes and muttered, "Here we go." As if preparing for the storm, my companion looked bewildered, unsure what to make of this new arrival. And I realized that today was testing every part of me: my past, my present, and even the hope I had for my future. Monique reached us, hands flailing as she pointed at my companion, her eyes scanning him from head to toe, and said with her signature bluntness, "Who's this? He's got that polished look. Don't tell me you dragged some rich boy back to the block." And my heart thudded painfully, because yes, that's exactly what had happened. But the words made me feel exposed, standing between two worlds I wasn't sure could ever merge. He smiled faintly, stepping forward with a calm that contrasted sharply with Monique's energy, and said, "I'm here to meet her family." And the way he said it, soft and respectful, made me ache inside, because he could have laughed. He could have turned away. But he didn't. He stayed, grounding me in the chaos of my life. Monique blinked at him, skeptical but curious, then looked at me and said, "Janet, you really hiding your life from him, huh? This is why we can't take you anywhere." And I couldn't help but laugh quietly, embarrassed, nervous, and relieved all at once, because her honesty cut through the tension and reminded me that my past wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was just loud, messy, and alive. My brother muttered something under his breath, a mix of amusement and exasperation, while Mama shook her head, still holding my arm gently, whispering, "Baby, just breathe, it's them, not him." And I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, because I realized that Monique's arrival was more than chaos. It was a reminder that no matter how much I tried to hide my past, it would always catch up. And today, it had come in full force, exposing me not just to my family, but to the man I cared for in a way I had never allowed before. My companion looked at me again, his eyes soft, patient, and understanding. And I knew in that moment that however loud, messy, or embarrassing the day got, he wasn't leaving. And yet, deep in my chest, I felt the knot of fear tighten once more, because life had a way of testing even the strongest moments of courage. And I had a feeling that Monique's laughter and presence were just the beginning of the challenges I wasn't ready to face. Monique wasn't done, of course. She stepped closer, hands on her hips, smirking like she had been waiting for this exact moment her whole life, and said, "So, you're really out here trying to impress this guy, huh, with your fancy dress and your smile like nothing ever happened?" And I felt my stomach tighten, because she was pointing to every effort I'd made to separate myself from the past I couldn't escape. Every careful choice I had made to seem composed, polished, and confident. And suddenly, all of that effort felt fragile and laughable under her sharp gaze. My companion looked at me quietly, waiting for an explanation, and I realized I didn't have one that could make sense to him. Not really. Not without peeling back every layer of my life he didn't know existed. And yet, I wanted him to understand, to see that this wasn't about him judging me. It was about me surviving my own history. Mama shook her head, muttering softly, "Monique, don't scare him off," while Marcus just leaned against the corner of the store, arms crossed, trying to look indifferent, but I could see the corners of his lips twitching, betraying his amusement. Tasha rolled her eyes dramatically, saying, "Girl, this is why you can't hide nothing from them. Your life always catches up." And her words hit like truth I hadn't wanted to admit. No matter how far I ran, no matter how clean I tried to make my story look, my past had a way of showing up, uninvited and unashamed. And today it had arrived fully in front of him, in front of my family, in front of everyone. I took a shaky breath, trying to find my voice, and finally said, "Monique, it's not about impressing anyone. I've worked hard to build a life that's mine, separate from all this." And my voice wavered because saying it out loud made the distance between my worlds feel impossibly real. He stepped closer softly and said, "I see that. I see you, Janet, all of it." And my chest tightened so much I thought I might cry, because he didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't look at me with anything other than something like awe and care. Monique tilted her head, scrutinizing him like he was a puzzle, then shrugged, muttering, "Well, if he's staying after seeing all this, maybe he's not too bad." And I laughed quietly, a little breathless, the tension easing ever so slightly because her bluntness had a strange way of making the day feel real, alive, and human. But even as a small relief settled over me, a quiet knot of anxiety remained, because I knew this wasn't the end. The neighborhood, the family, the past I tried to hide. It had a way of following me into the most unexpected moments, and deep down, I sensed that the day wasn't done exposing me yet. Not with Monique, not with Marcus, and not with the man beside me, who was slowly learning the weight of my story. After Monique's teasing, a quiet fell over the group for a moment, but I could feel the tension simmering just below the surface, like the calm before a storm, because the day had already stripped away every layer I had carefully built to keep my past separate from my present. My companion looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, soft, patient, curious, and maybe a little overwhelmed. And I realized that no matter how calm he seemed, he was seeing a side of me that no one had seen, not fully. And it terrified me, because what if he decided I was too much, too complicated, too tied to a past that never really let go? I could feel my hands trembling slightly as I tried to steady myself, gripping my purse tightly, and I took a slow breath, trying to find the words that could explain a lifetime in one sentence, which, of course, was impossible. Mama stepped closer, gently resting a hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Baby, Just let him see. He'll understand if he cares. And her reassurance made my chest tighten, because I wanted him to understand. But I also wanted to hide, to vanish into the cracked pavement and disappear from the weight of my history. Marcus muttered something under his breath, like he was half warning me and half amused. Yeah, Janet, the world never lets you forget who you are. And I realized he was right. The world never lets go. And sometimes the people you love are the ones who remind you the most. Monique snorted again, crossing her arms and grinning. Look at you all stiff, just talk already. Or he's gonna think you're some fragile doll. And her bluntness made me laugh quietly. The sound shaky, but genuine, because even in chaos, there was truth in her words. Life wasn't neat, and pretending it was never helped anyone. My companion finally stepped forward, his voice gentle but steady. Janet, you don't have to hide anything from me. I want to know all of it, the good, the hard, the messy. And my heart skipped, because no one had ever said those words to me with so much sincerity. And hearing them made the tight knot in my chest loosen just a little. Though fear still lingered, I swallowed hard, glancing at Marcus, Tasha, Monique, and Mama, realizing that my worlds, the past I ran from, and the present I was building, were colliding all at once. And I had no choice but to face them, to face him, to face myself. I opened my mouth to begin explaining, to start unraveling the parts of me that had been hidden for so long. But just as the first words were about to leave me, a sudden commotion caught my attention. A group of neighbors had gathered across the street, whispering and pointing at the scene, their eyes wide with curiosity. And I felt a fresh wave of anxiety, because I realized that not only was my past exposed to him and my family, but now everyone from the neighborhood was watching, waiting, and perhaps judging. And the day wasn't over yet. It was about to get even harder, and I wasn't sure if I could handle what came next. I felt my stomach tighten as I realized the neighbors were watching, their murmurs drifting across the cracked pavement like a wave I couldn't escape. And I wished, for just a moment, that I could shrink down and disappear into the concrete beneath my feet. My companion noticed immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly, scanning the crowd with a protective edge that made my heart flutter, because no one had ever looked out for me like that before. Not like this, not so calmly, yet firmly, standing with me while the past and present collided so openly. Marcus muttered, "They never miss a chance to gossip," shaking his head, half amused, half annoyed, while Monique waved at a few familiar faces, shouting, "Y'all quiet. Let her breathe," in her usual unstoppable way. And I couldn't help but smile faintly despite the pressure weighing down on me. Mama reached out, holding my hand tighter, whispering, "Baby, people will always talk. Let them. You know who you are." And her words were soothing. But inside, I still felt the familiar pang of shame and fear. The fear that my new life, the one I had worked so hard to build, might crumble if anyone from my past judged it too harshly. My companion stepped closer, bending slightly so his voice was only for me. "Janet, none of this changes how I see you. I want to understand all of it." And just hearing him say it made my throat tighten with emotions I couldn't name: relief, gratitude, hope, and the ache of years spent hiding who I was. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. And finally, I spoke, my voice low but steady. I grew up here. Every cracked sidewalk, every broken fence, every hand-me-down, every struggle, they made me who I am. I worked hard to survive, to build a life where I could breathe without fear. And I was scared that anyone outside this world would see it as weakness. And I watched as he listened, eyes soft and unwavering. And for the first time, I felt the layers I had worn like armor slowly start to peel away. Not with shame, but with cautious trust. Monique grinned mischievously, muttering, "See, fancy boy. She ain't fragile, just real." And Marcus let out a quiet laugh, his shoulders relaxing, while Mama's eyes shimmered with pride and unspoken relief. Yet even as I felt the tension ease, a part of me remained alert, because I knew that exposing the truth wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And the way the neighbors whispered, the way my family watched me, and the way he held my gaze made me realize that today would leave marks, not just on me, but on everyone around me. And deep down, I understood that the next moment could either break the fragile trust I had just started to feel or make it stronger. And I had no choice but to face it, whatever it might be. Just as I was catching my breath, trying to steady my racing heart, one of the neighbors, a woman I barely recognized, but who seemed to know everything about everyone, stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she looked at my companion and then back at me. And she asked loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "So this is the one she's been keeping from us, the rich boy." And my chest sank because I could feel all the whispers shift, the crowd leaning in, curious, judgmental. And I realized that no matter how much I had tried to control the narrative of my life, my past had a way of taking over, turning a simple day into a spectacle. My companion's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed steadier, his hands clasped lightly in front of him, not defensive, just present. And I felt a flicker of gratitude for him, because no one else in my life had ever faced my past so calmly, so patiently, with such quiet courage. Mama sighed softly, shaking her head, and muttered, "Baby, it's okay, just let them see. Let him see." And her words reminded me why I had fought so hard to hide, yet also why hiding was impossible. This life, these people, were all part of me. Marcus stepped forward slightly, looking almost protective now, and said to the neighbor, "She's my sister. She's always been strong. If he can't handle it, that's his problem." And I felt a wave of pride mixed with pain, because Marcus rarely said such things aloud. Yet here he was, standing firmly in my corner despite years of distance. Monique leaned against a lamppost, smirking. "I told you, fancy boy, she's real. Not some picture-perfect story." And the crowd chuckled softly, tension mixing with amusement. And I realized that the honesty of my world was both terrifying and liberating all at once. I looked at my companion then, and he finally smiled, small and warm, and said, "I like her real. I like all of her." And my chest tightened so hard I thought I might collapse, because hearing someone accept not just my present, but also the messy, painful, and vibrant past I had tried to hide felt like a weight lifting I didn't even know I was carrying. Yet even as relief began to spread through me, I felt a flicker of fear. This day wasn't over. Not yet. Not with Monique, the neighbors, my family, and the man I cared for all here, and I knew instinctively that the next few moments would test the fragile trust, the beginnings of understanding, and the courage I had summoned to reveal myself in a way I had never done before. And the thought of what might come next made my pulse race as I braced myself for whatever was about to happen. Just when I thought the tension might finally ease, Monique's laughter rang out again, sharp and teasing, cutting through the whispers of the crowd like a knife. And I knew instantly she was about to stir the pot even more. She leaned toward my companion, eyebrows raised, and said, "So, how does it feel, huh?" Meeting all of her chaos at once. And I felt my stomach twist because chaos was the perfect word for everything. The neighborhood, my family, my past, and now him. All colliding in one impossible, heart-pounding moment. He looked at her calmly, shrugging slightly, and said, "I don't know yet, but I want to." And my chest tightened so suddenly that I had to catch my breath. Because in that simple answer, I could feel both reassurance and the vulnerability of stepping into a world he had never known. Marcus snorted softly, leaning against the corner store, muttering, "You got a brave man there." And I felt a small flicker of pride, because for all the tension and fear, he hadn't run, hadn't judged, hadn't shied away from the truth I had spent years hiding. Mama squeezed my hand gently, whispering, "See, baby, he's here. He's not leaving." And the warmth of her words grounded me just enough to feel the fragile courage inside me grow. Yet even with relief, the crowd of neighbors pressed closer, murmuring and pointing, their curiosity pressing on us like the weight of history. And I realized that this day wasn't about them judging. It was about me finally standing in the middle of my worlds and showing them all that I could survive, that I could face everything, and that I could be accepted despite it. Tasha rolled her eyes dramatically, muttering under her breath, "Girl, you really brought him to the heart of it all." And I laughed nervously, the sound shaky but honest, because she was right. I had no choice now, no way to hide, no path back to the half-life I had lived before. My companion stepped closer, voice low but steady. "Janet, you've been carrying all of this alone for so long, and I see it now. I want to know it all, every part." And hearing him say that made tears threaten my eyes, because no one had ever asked me to share my pain, my struggle, my messy history with such patience and care. Just as I opened my mouth to begin explaining in full, a sudden shout came from across the street, louder and sharper than before, and my heart skipped a beat, because I recognized the voice immediately. It was Mr. Caldwell, the neighbor who had always been a thorn in my side, and his presence promised that the day's lessons weren't over yet, that exposure, judgment, and confrontation were still waiting, and I had no choice but to face it head-on, with everyone watching, and with him, the man who had just promised to stay by my side. The moment I heard Mr. Caldwell shout, my heart dropped like a stone into icy water, because he had always been the kind of neighbor who made sure nobody ever forgot their place, who judged every little thing and made his opinions known louder than anyone else dared. And now, standing there with my companion, my family, and the neighborhood watching, I felt all the weight of my past pressing down on me. He stomped closer, his face red with indignation, and barked, "Janet, what's all this? Bringing strangers into our streets, showing off like you forgot where you came from." And my chest tightened painfully, because even though I had spent years trying to rise above the judgments, some people never let go. And for a moment, I felt the old fear creep back, the fear of being shamed, exposed, and misunderstood. All at once, my companion stepped forward, calm but firm, and said, "Sir, I mean no disrespect. I'm here to meet Janet's family. That's all." And I watched as his composed tone clashed with Mr. Caldwell's fury, the tension thick in the air, while I clutched my purse tightly, feeling small in the middle of all these worlds colliding. Marcus muttered something under his breath, stepping in slightly. "Leave her be. She's grown, and she's strong enough to handle this." And I felt a rush of pride mixed with nerves, because my brother rarely spoke up like that. Yet here he was, defending me in front of the whole block. Monique laughed, loud and teasing. "See, fancy boy doesn't flinch. Maybe he's tougher than he looks." And her words made me smile nervously, because even in chaos, she somehow reminded me that the world could be taken lightly if you chose to see the humor in it. Mama placed a hand on my shoulder, murmuring softly, "Baby, let him talk. We know who you are. He'll figure it out eventually." And I drew in a shaky breath, feeling the courage she had always given me rise once more. Even though the knot in my stomach refused to loosen, Mr. Caldwell stepped closer, pointing a finger at my companion, voice rising. "You think just because you wear a clean suit and drive a nice car, you can come into our streets and charm everyone?" And I could see that the man standing beside me wasn't intimidated, just steady, his eyes soft on me, silently telling me that I wasn't alone, that he understood more than I realized, and that whatever judgment came our way, we would face it together. I swallowed hard, feeling the eyes of the entire block pressing down on me. And in that moment, I realized that life would always try to test me, to expose me, to see if I could hold my ground between who I was and who I had become. And deep inside, I knew that the confrontation wasn't just about him. It was about showing myself, my family, and this man that I could finally stand unashamed, no matter the past, no matter the judgments, and no matter the fear. I took a deep breath as Mr. Caldwell's words hung heavy in the air, feeling my chest tighten. But this time, I refused to shrink back. I stepped forward, standing a little taller than I thought I could, and said, "Mr. Caldwell, this is my life, my past, my family, and yes, the people I choose to let in. That includes him." And the moment the words left my mouth, a strange mix of tension and relief passed through the small crowd, because for the first time, I was speaking not out of fear or shame, but with courage. My companion didn't flinch, just nodded subtly at me, his calm presence like an anchor against the storm. And I felt my heart swell, because here he was, standing beside me, acknowledging my world without judgment. And it gave me a strange, new kind of strength. Marcus let out a low whistle, muttering, "Finally, she's talking like she owns it." And I couldn't help but smile faintly, because even his quiet approval carried weight, years of knowing my struggles, and finally seeing me stand firm. Monique laughed again, loud and unrestrained. Now that's more like it. Fancy boy, you're seeing it all, huh? No running away. And the laughter broke some of the tension, making the block feel a little smaller, a little less threatening, as if even chaos had to respect honesty. Mama squeezed my hand gently, whispering, "Baby, you're doing what I always hoped you would, show the world who you are without hiding." And I felt a rush of emotion, so strong it made my eyes sting, because I realized that today wasn't just about being seen by him or the neighbors. It was about finally accepting myself, all of me, in front of everyone who mattered. Mr. Caldwell grumbled something under his breath, shaking his head, clearly unwilling to admit he was impressed. Yet the stubborn lines of his face softened slightly, and I sensed that even he knew I had grown, survived, and claimed my place in this life. No matter what he thought. Tasha rolled her eyes dramatically, muttering, "Finally, she's not running." And I laughed quietly, the sound shaky but genuine, because even in the chaos, I could feel a sense of quiet victory, a fragile triumph over years of fear and hiding. My companion reached for my hand subtly, brushing his fingers against mine, and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Janet." And the words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds, warmth spreading through every part of me that had once felt small, unworthy, or ashamed. Yet even in this fragile victory, I felt a knot of anxiety, because the day wasn't over. The neighbors still whispered. Monique was still smirking. And I knew life had a way of testing you just when you thought you had found balance, reminding you that courage was never permanent, and that the next challenge was always just around the corner, waiting to see if you would stand firm or stumble. Just when I thought the tension had eased, Monique leaned in closer, eyes sparkling with mischief, and whispered loudly enough for the group to hear, "So, fancy boy, you sticking around after all this? You sure you're ready for the full ride?" And my stomach dropped, because she was right. The day had peeled back layers I never intended to show. And now he had to choose whether he could handle all of it, not just me, but the life I came from, the family I loved, and the neighborhood that shaped me. He looked at her quietly, then at me, and for a moment I held my breath, waiting, because his answer would reveal more than words. It would reveal whether the connection we were building could survive exposure, judgment, and raw truth. Finally, he stepped closer, his voice steady. "I don't just want to stick around, I want to understand. I want to be here for all of it." And the sincerity in his tone made my chest tighten, so much I thought I might collapse, because no one had ever offered me acceptance so openly, especially not for the messy, unpolished, real version of myself. Marcus muttered under his breath, clearly impressed. Well, she really outdid herself today. While Mama's lips curved into a quiet, proud smile, her eyes shimmering with relief and love, because she had always hoped someone would see me, all of me, and accept it without judgment. Tasha leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, shaking her head in mock disbelief. "Girl, you're really testing him." And I couldn't help but laugh softly, the sound shaky, vulnerable, but real, because she was right. The day had pushed us all, forcing truth into the open, and it had revealed both courage and fragility in ways I hadn't anticipated. The neighbors murmured softly among themselves, their curiosity unabated, but now tinged with respect. Because seeing someone claim their life openly and unapologetically, even in the face of judgment, had a strange power, and I could feel it in the air, pressing against the weight of old fears and doubts I had carried for years. My companion reached for my hand subtly, intertwining his fingers with mine, and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." And hearing him say, it made the tension around me soften just a little, because it meant that despite exposure, chaos, and judgment, a bridge had been built between my past and the life I hoped to live. Yet even as a fragile peace settled over the street, I couldn't shake the awareness that today's lessons weren't finished. Monique's laughter, Marcus's quiet judgment, the neighbors' whispers, and even my mother's gentle guidance reminded me that life was relentless, always testing whether we could stand unashamed. And I knew instinctively that the next moment, however small, would either strengthen this bond or unravel it, and I had to be ready. The street had quieted for a moment, but the weight of the day pressed on me like a heavy cloak, and I realized that even with my companion holding my hand and Monique grinning mischievously, I hadn't yet fully faced the reality of being completely seen. I took a slow, shaky breath, feeling the warmth of his hand grounding me, and whispered softly, "I've spent so long hiding, trying to look like everything's perfect, like my past didn't exist." And the words trembled on my lips, because admitting them in front of everyone felt like exposing my soul. A raw vulnerability I wasn't sure I was ready to share. He looked down at me, eyes soft and unwavering, and said quietly, "Janet, you don't have to hide from me, or from anyone who truly cares. I see you." And the sincerity in his voice made my chest ache, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and fear swirling inside me. Marcus shifted beside us, finally nodding with quiet approval, muttering under his breath, "She's stronger than she looks," while Mama squeezed my shoulder gently, her eyes glistening, a silent affirmation that even after all the judgment, exposure, and tension, I had claimed my place and my story. Monique snorted, rolling her eyes but smiling. "Guess he's not running." "Good, he better not." And the humor in her voice, even as it poked fun at the moment, reminded me that family, chaos, and truth were inseparable. And today had proven that. Tasha muttered something about drama being her specialty, and I laughed quietly, the sound shaky but genuine, because the day had been a storm of fear, judgment, and exposure. And yet somehow, amidst all of it, I had survived, and more than that, I had begun to bridge the worlds I'd kept separate for so long. The neighbors slowly began to drift away, whispers turning to soft nods and quiet smiles, the judgment in their eyes replaced by a tentative respect. And I realized that exposure wasn't always shameful. Sometimes it was the first step toward being truly seen, truly understood. My companion tightened his hold on my hand and murmured, "I want to be part of all of this, Janet. Your world, your family, everything." And the weight of those words settled into me, a fragile but powerful reassurance that even when life exposed the parts I feared most, love could remain steadfast. Yet deep inside, I knew the day wasn't over. Not fully, not while Monique's laughter still echoed, not while Marcus's quiet watchfulness lingered, and not while I carried the fragile hope that bridging my past and my present might finally be possible. Because tomorrow would come, and with it, new tests, new exposures, and new chances to prove that courage wasn't just surviving the day. It was facing it fully, unashamed, and with heart open wide. The sun was starting to dip low, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement, and I felt a quiet settle over the street, though inside me, my heart still raced from everything that had happened. The neighbors had mostly drifted away, leaving only my family, Monique, and my companion standing close. The air thick with unspoken words and emotions that no one wanted to rush. I looked at him, his fingers still entwined with mine, his calm eyes steady on me, and I realized how much courage it had taken just to reach this moment, exposed, unguarded, and yet not broken. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a fragile sense of pride for standing firm in the middle of my worlds. Mama's hand rested lightly on my shoulder, warm and grounding, her soft whisper, "You did it, baby. You showed him all of you," carrying more love and validation than I had expected. And I felt tears prick my eyes, the weight of years of hiding, fear, and silence lifting slightly. Marcus finally exhaled, muttering, "She's something else," and I smiled faintly, knowing that even his quiet acknowledgement meant more than any words could say. Monique grinned, still teasing, "You two make it look easy, but it's not, huh?" And I laughed softly, because the truth was, nothing about today had been easy. The exposure, the judgment, the fear, the rawness. But somehow we had survived it together. Tasha nudged me gently, whispering, "Welcome to being fully seen, cousin." And the warmth of family acceptance, messy and loud as it was, reminded me that hiding from the world had only prolonged the inevitable truth. My past and present were inseparable, and to embrace life fully, I had to let them coexist. My companion leaned closer, brushing his thumb gently across my knuckles, and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me with all of this. I see you, Janet. All of you." And my chest swelled with emotion I could barely name: relief, love, hope, and the fragile courage of someone finally allowed to be entirely themselves. Yet even in this quiet victory, I felt the subtle pulse of reality beneath it. The world never paused. The neighbors still whispered behind doors. Monique's laughter would return, and life would continue to test whether courage could hold. But for now, I let myself breathe, let myself exist fully in this moment, feeling the warmth of his hand, my family's presence, and the knowledge that today my story had been seen, not judged, and that maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to let love and life meet me halfway. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting golden light over the street, I felt the fragile, exhilarating truth of being exposed, accepted, and alive all at once. And deep down, I knew this day would mark a turning point, where hiding ended, honesty began, and the courage to bridge worlds became not just a hope, but a promise to myself.